let's not discard this. Let's not discard this at all. Let's not kind of be too modest and shy and presume that our work that we do makes no difference, or it only makes difference to our own life. This was never so and never will be so. And we know, it's interesting that it came full circle, full circle, that this, what now quantum scientists are saying, that there is a possibility that actually every human being, because it's a conscious creature, impacts the whole universe in the way that it's impossible to explain from the Newtonian, from the point of view of Newtonian physics. But from the point of view of quantum physics, that is direct possibility. And this possibility has been always emphasized and spoken about by many perennial traditions in various ways. There were different perspectives, different ways of how it is being said. You remember, for instance, that especially in the Buddhist teachings, how that the tension between what is the real responsibility of a conscious being, what to tend to. The house is on fire. What do you do? Do you run and extinguish the fire, help to extinguish the fire? Or do you continue your work? This has always been in the focal point of attention by spiritual communities and those who are in a position to speak about this, so as to address that very subtle tension between where am I benefiting the most? For those of us who have more of that, if you will, altruistic nature. Sometimes life can sweep us with its currents and tumble us so deep down under, so we barely have enough time to keep the head above the water, above the waves. So there is not much thinking goes into, am I contributing to the greater good on the planet? But as soon as there is that possibility, let's say, as soon as we can have that moment to breathe more easily, it is in the human nature very much, because our nature is divine, and more about it throughout the retreat. There is this natural propensity to ponder in the direction of how my life affects life as such, life as a whole, or life on the whole. So here, that old Buddhist, you see, that Buddha versus Bodhisattva. You've heard about this, right? Have you heard about the Buddha versus Bodhisattva? Do you want us to make a little distinction here, right? So that what's the difference between Buddha and Bodhisattva? Because you see many, like you open this beautiful magazine or a book about Buddhist art, and you will see sculptures of Buddha, many, many sculptures of Buddha. But then you will come across this Bodhisattva. So who is the Bodhisattva? Is it a cousin of Buddha? A relative? Or who is he? Nephew? Right? Well, so within the Buddhist law, there is this understanding that the Buddha, of course, the Buddha is the awakened one. And the proper understanding that it's not just one single Buddha who lived at that particular time, let's say 5,000 years from now, roughly, give or take. We know the kingdom where he was born, and he had a name. He was Gautama Siddhartha, and he became Buddha. And of course, the tribute is being paid constantly to that great being who is at the origin of one of the oldest, at least existing religions in the world. But so basically, just to conclude, but it's not correct perspective in the metaphysics of Buddhism. So it's not just one single Buddha, which comes at a particular point in time, or in a singular point in time, and then everything is with reference to that being, and then how is everyone else doing in reference to that being? No, the metaphysics actually that there are as many Buddhas as beings there, because everyone's nature is Buddha's nature, or the nature of a human is actually Buddha nature. So the realization here is that noble realization of one's essence. Once that essence is realized, one becomes, therefore, a Buddha in his own, her own right. That realization amounts for reclaiming that what is one's essence at birth anyway. So therefore, there is not a single Buddha in point in time, but rather an uninterrupted sequence of Buddhas, those beings who have realized the essential nature, and it has never been interrupted. It doesn't start with Gautama. It started way before. If that was not the case, that desire would not even enter the heart of the prince in the first place. So that is when it comes to Buddha. So that's clear, I hope. Then there is this other term, Bodhisattva, because Buddha completely transcends everything, transcends the joy and sorrow. The realization of Buddha is such, it transcends all this, what otherwise is considered and spoken of from the perspective of human condition, whatever that may mean, whatever that may represent. And he abides in nirvana, in total freedom, unaffected by the field of action. This is the difference, you see. He abides in nirvana. Nirvana here stands in opposition to samsara. You are either in samsara or you are in nirvana. You can't be in both. It's simply impossible. But I'm not a Buddhist priest and I'm not a Buddhist scholar, so don't take me on that. I'm just speak sometimes whatever comes to me. I don't even know where it comes from. Maybe there's like a warmer weather and kind of like feels sitting on the banyan tree, right? But go and check, find out, Sometimes known saying a lot of things that actually turn out to be not so. So what is then Bodhisattva? Bodhisattva is another term which is indispensable part of the Buddhist vocabulary when we speak of the deities. It's the creature who has realized the Buddha within, and therefore has no need to return into the world of samsara, no need for rebirth whatsoever. The job is completed completely, utterly and entirely. There's nothing else left. There's no seed of karma there, no seed of desire to reincarnate and have human birth. That is the fact, or at least tradition swears by it. And yet, swelled with compassion for other sentient beings, that Buddha forgoes that ticket of no return and buys a return ticket. Do you understand the algorithm? He has one-way ticket and he says, no, I want a return one, please. Okay? That's the noble gesture of the Bodhisattva. From there on, that enlightened being, that one who is in nirvana, he is Bodhisattva because he chooses to reincarnate so as to uplift all other beings, because he sees that although suffering is illusory from the point of view of nirvana, once the samsara ceases to be, creatures who are caught in the wheel of samsara are suffering, and that's a fact. Therefore, swelled by that compassion, Bodhisattva keeps returning. Bodhisattva keeps returning into the field of action, called Dharma, so as to uphold it. That's the term Bodhisattva, the compassionate one. It's the aspect of Buddha which forgoes forgoes the possibility of cessation from rebirth and consciously reincarnates. And it goes as far as Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, another term for you. It's the one who reincarnates thousands of times so as to keep going back to uplift humanity. So this is a noble concept that comes with the Buddhist lore, that you see that we could say this very, very easy to relate in a way concepts of, because we can see this also from the point of view of the tradition of humanism, if you will. This is within that transcendentalism, within that purely transcendental tradition, there is something that, if you will, connects that with the ideas of the humanists. It's that aspect which makes Bodhisattva more human, you see? Although he's above all these joys and sorrows, above the pleasure and suffering, about all this, because it is transcended. Make no mistake, Buddha sees that there's no difference between all this, what we have preferences and aversion. It completely sees everything in one light, in the same light. So from that point of view, you can actually also understand why it could also bring about a very different, more radical understanding that it's all of the same nature. So there's no need to worry about it, no need to sweat about it. And yet, it has this other, if you will, aspect, which is exemplified by Bodhisattva. It's the choice that the Buddha makes to come back into the field of action. How it is done, it's another story, because obviously, if you are here now a little bit kind of more familiar with some of these Vedic or yogic perspectives, in order for a soul to come back, there has to be some seed of desire, there has to be something to take the body to begin with, right? So we're not going to go there, we can just leave that to imagination. Maybe the desire to uplift others is enough to gain another body. Let's leave it at that, right? But please don't take it for granted, this is just suggestion. I'm just suggesting because, something has to work itself. Something has to happen. But all this all was spoken in view of that, if you will, soon as we can lift our head above the stormy waters, and soon as we can feel, let's say, more confident and rise above the circumstances, then it is natural, it is within the human nature to think of others in whichever way. In fact, forgive me if I'll bring this comfortable or not so comfortable suggestion, that if we don't have the time to think of others, it's an indication in itself that we are very much engrossed in our own suffering. It's as simple as that. It's a fact, whether we like it or not. If we don't have that ability, it's simply because we're still being tumbled down under. And we're not speaking about it like in terms of how it is spoken in other settings, in other circumstances, where it's kind of, okay, well, I'm doing well in business, so I need to... I'm not talking about this kind of seeds of philanthropy. This is a bit more subtle affair. This is all at the level of the heart. This is at the level of really, the real compassion comes not from mental activity. It comes from very, very direct realization of seeing yourself in the other and feeling yourself in the other. This is where the waves of compassion really come from. So this is again spoken in terms of how the work that we do spiritually affects our life, but in turn affects life of all sentient beings. And this is important to understand this, because the Buddhists, where I kind of borrowed the example, that dilemma, it's very well known, and not just known for some times, let's say in antiquity or in later centuries or years, but it's known even down to our times. If you read any of these publications, where modern masters of that tradition speak, that these polemics are spoken about now, these days. These polemics, what it takes, what it is like, what a real purpose, like the house is on fire, whatever that represents, you see. Maybe today it represents in that collective talk as a ecological situation, right? Or ecological calamity. And then there is a spiritual practice, which is very, very existential in its nature. Buddhism is only a point of reference here, but of course all these practices which has in its core the aspect of transcendence may be seen as utterly and entirely acts of self-indulgence. Acts of kind of, where is the guarantee that me doing spiritual work affects the world in a positive way, instead of actually going out and doing something physically, contributing in some more tangible ways? So these questions are not just trivial speculations, these are factual questions that people are confronted with. And it is very important that we honestly face these questions, especially if these questions linger somewhere in the background and rise. And again, don't feel bad if these questions don't rise, because it simply means that we are essentially being taken over by our personal circumstances, and these circumstances don't allow the possibility of having a more elevated perspective. But soon as that more elevated perspective presents itself, then there it goes. You see? There it goes. I maybe want to make a little a kind of example, give you an example. Just to illustrate it in whatever way that may be relevant to what has been spoken, and more so in relation how this may sit with each of you or any of you. For example, when we go through this, let's say we'll take this example of awakening, which so much spoken these days. When we take this example of going through the transformation, and the aspect of placing intentions. And I remember back in the days where very, very subtly we were taught how and when to place that subtle intention in relation to one's own life, sort of to assist certain processes, so as to help, let's say, from that innocent place. And that innocent place has the most power when one comes out of, let's say, meditative session, and this is when one places the intention. So I remember very vividly, and then this is not just in relation to myself. I knew people with whom I have shared this, and this was interesting phenomenon. Then the deeper transcendence, or the deeper state of transcendence that was experienced, the less propensity there would be to place an intention pertinent to one's own life. I almost found it fascinating that when the body is there vibrating in this already state, and you know now you barely bring the awareness to the field where you can kind of like, okay, now I ought to place an intention. But the transcendence here also, accompanied by tremendous bliss. And there's no area in your life that at that moment, please don't just misunderstand me here. In that moment, there's no area in one's life that one wants to place intention. One's life may be full of areas of improvement from the outside. But in that moment of transcendence, energy simply doesn't go there. Energy simply doesn't go there. It's like you blanked. It's like almost lacking certain connections that will be like, oh, I would like to, what have you, whatever the example. No. And what the only area or the only field where one feels to, let's say, still that something which along the lines of that, let's say the thinking of the Bodhisattva, it's this, like these waves of that what you're experiencing in that moment, may that be experienced by others. May the world that, and these are, then you go and you find out that apparently these are practices prevalent and known in pranic healing, in the advanced level of Reiki healing, like Reiki healers of a certain degree, when you go into the third level, it's a routine practice to heal the world. You don't just heal a relative or a customer or someone who asks you. You actually heal conflicts. World conflicts. You heal the world. Like there's this practice where the whole planet is being held in the waves and rays of light. Literally bathed and held. This is Reiki practice. It's also known in many other psychic healing modalities of other traditions, as aforementioned pranic healing. So in these states of transcendence, placing personal desire was almost was lacking some kind of neuroconnection. So these meanderings are all about how when we gather together, and though the work may and will feel deeply personal, may affect the greater whole. And this is not to swell and feel about it in a kind of sense of self-importance, but more humbly understanding how we have no understanding of that. How can that be like that? Let's say, the other extreme of this is like puny human being can affect the cosmos. Now, to affect the world. And yet that is so. That what is being spoken of now, these days, out loud, not whispering in certain corners. No, people teach. They go, they uprise on the occasions, and they speak in front of the audiences at these TED Talks, at the universities. People speak out loud that there is this possibility that every human being is, in fact, a cosmos in its entirety. Cosmos in its entirety, completely. The macrocosmos and microcosmos here is not different at all. These are the, if you will, main tenets of Tantra. That's why we speak about it. Because if this is not fully understood or somehow stubbornly rejected on the accounts of these deeply held doubts, then this cannot give a full impact of what this work affords, because these are the tenets of the teaching, the cornerstones of understanding that there is no such thing as me human being. It's a concept, a fictitious character, a byproduct of cultural imagination temporarily entertaining itself as so, where in fact it's nothing other than consciousness in a state of masterpiece of neurophysiological wiring. And the degree to which it is wired, it can vibrate as the entire cosmos. So this is where Tantra begins, not ends. It begins from that understanding.